Hello guys and welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about the Detroit Red Wings and how this next NHL season could be a make or break year for the Yzerplan. There's a lot of expectations for a lot of teams in the Atlantic, but Detroit seems like one of the most highly pressured teams to take that next step and finally make the NHL playoffs. So today we're going to be breaking down their situation presented by BetUS, so make sure you watch till the end as we go through this entire Detroit roster to see if they're a playoff team or not, to see where the expectations may be, and to see where the Yzerplan is heading. Will it be in a good direction finally, or will it disappoint once again? Well, make sure you watch till the end for all that, and subscribe for more hockey content just like this all throughout the year. A big reason why I'm making this video today was me realizing this morning, wait, Steve Yzerman has been GM of the Red Wings for more than 5 years now. And we have seen this team completely change since then, being in a cap disaster started by Ken Holland, and in the worst position possible, Steve Yzerman came in and changed everything for the better. You look at where the team was in Steve Yzerman's first year, and you could see one of the worst teams in modern history, getting 39 points in 71 games in that shortened season. And you can see the improvement since then, 48 points, 74 points, 80 points, and then this last year finally breaking that 90-point plateau. The progression has been exceptionally palpable. And as you can see, they were so close to making it. They literally tied the Washington Capitals in points, but in the craziest tiebreaker situation of all time, Washington got in while Detroit sat out, which I think for that playoff series versus the Rangers made it a much worse one. I think Detroit would have put up more of a fight. But you look at this Detroit Red Wings team and the position that they're in their franchise, it feels like it's playoffs or bust. It feels like this is the year that they have to make that progression, to not just get close to making it, not just make those big strides, but to finally be in that top 16 and finally get a ticket to the big dance. Now, interestingly, Yzerman was actually asked about this last preseason, talking about the Red Wings and saying that it's not playoffs or bust for them, basically talking about if he was trading a bunch of draft picks, a bunch of prospects, then for him it would be playoffs or bust. Now, compared to my definition of playoffs or bust, it's a little bit different than that. I like to consider the situation, the context, everything surrounding this team, and especially when it comes to expectations, that can set up a playoffs or bust situation. I think there's a few teams out there this year that have that type of pressure. A few of these teams that didn't end up making last year that I think if they were to miss again this season could see some pretty substantial changes. I think Detroit is one of those teams, but I also think you have other teams in the Eastern Conference like the Pittsburgh Penguins that I think could fit that bill. Same thing, you could even make the argument with the Ottawa Senators. Even other teams in the West too, like the Minnesota Wild, I think fit this description pretty perfectly. Which made me remember that I didn't predict any of these 4 teams to make the playoffs in my standings predictions, but it is what it is. Now, as much as Steve Yzerman might not like to admit, I think there is a ton of pressure here for this Detroit roster when it comes to the upper management, when it comes to the fans of the team, as there rightly should be. Sure, you got to consider the context here of Yzerman, how he came into a horrible situation, and that is, of course, a very clear thing that happened. But it's still year 6 of him being a GM. This is the 6th year of this rebuild for Detroit, of this clear, obvious rebuild. And you're going to want to start seeing some results eventually. And I think this year, if they don't make it, if they don't have those results, I think there could be some pretty massive changes. Now, we have a lot more to talk about in today's video, but first, let's talk about today's sponsor in BetUS. And there's a lot of opportunities here with the hockey season coming up, especially if you're high on the Detroit Red Wings. Right now, if you guys use code YouTube150, you'll get an 150% sign-up bonus on your first deposit, and then 125% sign-up bonus on your next 2 deposits there. One heck of a deal to get started. And if you're high on Detroit right now, they got odds to make the playoffs at plus 135, and to miss is at minus 165. But if you're feeling good about them, you can put just like $5 down and win a couple bucks by the end of the season, or go big and go home and get $135 in your 100 deposit right there. It's a lot of different options there, but you can also go for the regular season points. You can go also to Detroit and talk about the over and under points. I mean, I have them missing the playoffs, but even I have them over 90.5 points, so you could go for that as well. You can also go for the divisions, the Stanley Cup winner. You can go through all the trophy odds as well there. So many options with BetUS. And thank you to BetUS for sponsoring today's video. Now, if Detroit ends up missing the playoffs again this next year, I don't think Yzerman loses his job, but I do think some major questions will start to arise. Now, there's already been a lot of questions from a lot of the public discourse around Yzerman and his roster building and some of the question marks there, the lack of star power, and some of the ways that he's built this Detroit team, but that would all be erased if the results actually start coming. They almost did this last year, but if they do, it will shut up those questions. But I think there is a 50-50 chance that Detroit ends up missing the playoffs again, and I think that chance is pretty realistic. A lot of this is once again caused by the menace that is the Atlantic Division. If Detroit were in the Pacific, I would have no trouble calling them a playoff team because I think they probably would be. But you look at that menace of the Atlantic Division and you got top teams still like Florida and Boston that if Swayman is to be signed, I still think are going to be at the top of the division. You have Toronto, who I think is going to be at the top still. You even have a team like Tampa Bay, who I even had missing the playoffs in my predictions on top of Detroit. But you could realistically have Tampa still in the conversation. They got Jay Gensel. They had some upgrades in bringing Ryan McDonough back. They still got Andre Vasilevsky. They still got Kucherov, Point, Hedman. They still got the supporting cast there. You can make the argument that Tampa will still be in the same position, still be a playoff team. And if that happens, I think Detroit's chances drop even further. Now, granted, in my playoff predictions, and this is something that you could agree or disagree with, I had Buffalo as the big riser in the Atlantic Division. They're a team that just with the positive regression that I see in their offense getting back to a normal level next year, on top of, I think, the goaltending difference is going to be there with Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen having a solid full season, with Devon Levi being a lot more ready. I think you're going to see a lot of upgrades in that four group and throughout the roster, and ultimately, I think that'll make them a playoff team in the Atlantic, but you could easily switch them with Tampa Bay and have Detroit in the same exact position, and I could easily see that happening. You even look at the bottom of the division. Even though I don't see Ottawa making the playoffs, they got Linus Ullmark, which will be a huge addition for them, and I think it's pretty easy to see them increasing by 10, 12 or so points and being in that 88, 90 point range. Montreal is also going to be wanting to make some big upgrades this year. They already got Patrick Laine. You, of course, are hopefully going to have a fully healthy season of Kirby Dach. That's going to be huge. So you got a lot of factors there for the Habs, too, that will likely be increasing their point totals as well. So this Atlantic Division is going to be absolutely nuts, and it will once again, maybe even more so than last year, be an absolute war of attrition. The problem for Detroit is, unlike a team like Buffalo, who made a lot of additions into their bottom six, and I think just has a better youth core going forward, I think for the Red Wings, there's not a lot that I think is going to get too much better, especially when you consider the offseason additions they made, if you even want to call it that. You look at the forward group, and of course, they ended up getting Vladimir Tarasenko, who I think will be a good addition for them, but I think is mostly going to bring his value at the power play level. Like a Patrick Kane, he's somebody that I think is going to be best when you have the sheltered role around him, but that's another older winger who I think might have some injury issues if things shake out that way, who isn't a guarantee, and I think for the Red Wings, they might have needed another guarantee into that top six, and I don't know if they got it here. But you look at that forward group, and it's a lot of decent outside of that top line, but it's nothing absolutely extraordinary. I think that's maybe the big weakness with this Red Wings team, is that there's just not a lot of pushing of play within this lineup, especially at 5-on-5. Then you look at the defense, and I think the big addition will end up being someone Edvinsson, who will hopefully come into this year and finally be a ready and consistent NHLer, but you're also relying on a younger guy to be this driving force to Detroit, and I don't think in his rookie year he's going to be that. He'll provide some value defensively, and I think he's going to have his moments, but you're going to have some growing pains there naturally with any young player in the league. Unless you end up pairing Edvinsson with Seider, which would be a ton of fun, granted, you might have a situation where, again, it's Ben Chiarot with Moritz Seider, which I think is once again anchoring Seider's play overall, and I think that could, again, be a detriment to Detroit's defense like it was last year. I get why the pairing is a thing. It tries to minimize risk as much as possible, but I think with how bad of a pairing those two seem to be at times, you're almost risking Seider's long-term play, and that's something I just don't think you can risk at this point. You're going to be relying on players like Jeff Petrie, Ben Chiarot, Eric Gustafsson to play big minutes for this defense, and sue me, I'm just not convinced. And then you look at the goaltending, man, and this is, again, I think going to be a problem. I love Alex Lyon, and I love what he can do, but it's obvious that if he's absolutely relied upon, he can't put up those unreal numbers for a full season, and that's something that I think Detroit had to learn last year. So they went out and got Cam Talbot. But you look at what the goaltending is going to look like, and that top three is going to be Cam Talbot, Alex Lyon, and Ville Husso. In Husso's case, he might even be dumped to the AHL to make the cap space work for this year, which is a whole different conversation. But most likely the goaltending tandem will be Cam Talbot and Alex Lyon. And if they progress from last year, then I think it can be a decent tandem, but I think it's asking a lot of them. In Alex Lyon's case, I think last year was about as good as he could have done, considering the sample size, considering how much he needed to play. It was pretty foreign for him to play that amount of games, and I think he did about as good as he could have. And you got Cam Talbot, who started out the year blistering hot with LA, kind of teetered off in that second half, but ended up with a .913 save percentage, far better than I think a lot of people expected. But the situation is this: he's 37 years old now, not even 36 anymore. He's 37, and although he had a great season last year, especially to start things out, it's a tall order for him to replicate that at his age, and it's a heavy risk too. Goaltending is always voodoo. I do get that, and I do understand that for Detroit, you don't want to get this Busey Saros type starter who will block players like Sebastian Cossa and Trey Augustine in the future, because they are the future. That tandem is going to be ridiculous someday, but that day isn't yet. I don't think it's this year. I don't think we'll see Cossa. Maybe he'll play a couple NHL games, but I don't think we'll see him in a major role. I think for the Red Wings, they tried to have this stopgap situation here, but I honestly think it might cost them the division. I think in terms of goaltending, when you look at even some of the other teams in their similar position, Buffalo, I think, is going to have a massive advantage with Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen and Devon Levi. And in Ottawa's case, you got Linus Ullmark. In Tampa's case, you got Andre Vasilevsky. I think that clear difference is going to come into play here. Now, I do want to make it as clear as I can that I'm rooting for Detroit. Really, I'm rooting for Detroit, Buffalo. I'm rooting for even Ottawa to take big steps and even potentially make the playoffs. I mean, I would love if the Bruins were to miss the playoffs. I mean, the least missing the playoffs would be hilarious. I would love to see all these teams play spoiler and make the playoffs, get into the dance, but I try to be as realistic as I can be on this channel. I try to take everything into account, and I would love for the Red Wings to get lucky, but I just think in this division in the Atlantic, luck is not something you can afford. And I think with their lackluster offseason, with a lot of issues that need to be addressed not being addressed, I think that's something that will hurt Detroit in the end. I think it's pretty ironic for Detroit that I think in the last couple of seasons, free agency wise, they've overspent, they've overdone in cases like Andrew Kopp and Ben Sherrod's cases, in Jeff Petrie's cases. But I think this last year, they needed to make some major additions. They got Vladimir Tarasenko, sure, but I think they needed to add a strong starting goaltender. I wanted to see them make a big addition out of that defense, but your big addition was Eric Gustafsson. The power play ability wasn't the problem there. They had Shane Gostisbehere for that last season, and he was pretty terrific. I think it's a downgrade going from Gostisbehere to Gustafsson, but I feel like they needed to make some major additions here in almost every single position. You could make the case that they did on the foregroup with Tarasenko, but I think throughout the rest of the lineup, it was a little bit disappointing. I didn't even realize this, but you can make the case that Detroit's defense is worse than last year. I'm high on Edvinsson, so I think he will have a solid rookie season, but you lost both Jake Walman and Shane Gostisbehere, and in Gostisbehere's case, again, I think he's better than what Gustafsson can be as a power play quarterback, and Walman, I think, is a pretty decent loss for them. Even though last year I don't think he had his greatest season, I think he could have been a solid player for this next year and a proven commodity. In Edvinsson's case, he can be solid, but obviously is a wait and see. I want so badly to say that Detroit will be a playoff team. I want so badly to say that they'll finally make the playoffs, because I think it would be awesome to see playoff hockey once again in Hockey Town. It's been far too long since that's happened, and it's pretty crazy to see the shift, because back when they were making the playoffs consistently, we were all hoping around the NHL world for them to finally stop making it, and now we just wish that they can, because it is such an iconic hockey town. It is such an iconic franchise, and the playoffs are better when the Red Wings are in it and are in the thick of it and do have a chance to win the Stanley Cup. And I'm hoping they are able to take that next step this year, but I still have my doubts. I will say I don't think this season is a true make or break year for them. I don't think they're going to absolutely explode the franchise and explode the team if they don't end up making it. But I do think there starts to become some major questions. And if they miss this next year, I think, is a make or break. That could be a make or break for Steve Yzerman's job security. Even though he is a legend, he is about as legendary of a GM as you can get in the modern day. Still, GMs need to provide results. They need to provide playoff ability, and Detroit needs to prove that sooner or later. And I hope it's this year so we can finally stop doubting the Yzerplan. I'm hoping to see it all come together, but we'll still have to wait and see on that one. Let me know, though, what your guys' thoughts are on this Detroit Red Wings team. Do you think that this is the year that they're finally able to make it? Do you see them making the playoffs this year? Do you see them missing? And what are your thoughts on the Yzerplan? Are you doubting it? Do you think it'll be coming into play finally this next year and we'll see it all come together? I would love to hear your thoughts down below. Of course, make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell if you guys haven't already, and share the video with all the hockey fans you guys know online. And of course, click on this card for all of my Training Rick talk right in one playlist. And of course, make sure you sign up to BetUS using code YouTube150. And thank you to BetUS for sponsoring today's video. I will see you guys in the next one, though, and have a great hockey day. Goodbye.